everybody. Christina Previtt here, and welcome to the PT on Ice Daily Show. I am one of two lead faculty for modern management of the older adult. We have 3 course offerings. We have our online essential foundations, our advanced concepts, and our live course, which will hopefully be resuming soon. I am a Canadian, and I am really hoping that they let me across the border. I don't really know if that's going to happen anytime soon. It just got extended, but I will be back teaching courses at some point. Today I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about using the deadlift for osteoarthritis and some of the considerations that we will take when we use it for a symptomatic knee OA versus a symptomatic hip OA. Over the last 5 or 10 years, we have actually learned a lot about some of the pathophysiology of arthritis and what that can mean in regards to rehab. We know that osteoarthritis is one of the most common sources of musculoskeletal pain as we get older. We know that age is one of the biggest risk factors for OA, but also things regarding mechanical repetitive movements in regards to occupational stress and previous injuries are going to lead to an increased risk of OA. What we also know now is that there is a low-grade inflammation component to even osteoarthritis. Previously, we've thought a lot around things like ankylosing spondylitis, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, those inflammatory umbrella of arthritis pathologies as the ones that are having more of that inflammatory cascade that is going on, leading to some of the signs and symptoms. But we are now realizing in the literature that there is also an inflammatory component to our mechanical types of OA. What that means is that we're always going to be talking about chronic disease management and healthy lifestyle factors because we know that it's going to have an influence in OA. But that's just an aside. So when we're thinking about how we're going to be working with individuals with OA and how we're going to be getting their joints stronger, we know that the literature is fairly clear that that muscle strengthening is one of the best ways to combat some of the pain around lower extremity arthritis. We like to use the big bang for your buck exercises. I don't think that's much of a surprise if you guys have been following the MMOA faculty for any length of time. And one staple is the hip hinge. So oftentimes people will start with an elevated deadlift, and the reason for that is to try and limit joint range of motion. But I'm going to make the argument that we probably don't need to do that for a knee osteoarthritis just based on the joint range of motion that we're going to experience with a true hip hinge. And then I'm going to go through a couple of different ways that we can scale the deadlift and the hip hinge movement so that we can get people started in loading them pretty much day one. One of the reasons why I really love for knee osteoarthritis, one of the reasons why I really love the deadlift is because you don't really go through a ton of knee range of motion. So it's one of these exercises that I can really start to load up fairly early. And because of that, I can start getting a little bit of that build the bike where people assume that any sort of activity or exercise that they're doing is going to lead to pain. We often have individuals who have symptomatic knee OA who when they try to squat have a very forward knee translation, and that impact of the femur into that knee joint is going to cause a lot of anterior knee pain, and people are going to assume that they can't squat. But a hip hinge is not like that. So when we're thinking about just the joint, I'm going to try and move this camera back. If you guys are listening through the podcast, I'm going to try to explain this as best as possible. If you're watching through Facebook Live or YouTube, you're going to try and see me demo this. I'm going to try and make sure I'm nice and loud. So when we think about the deadlift, we think about keeping the load nice and close to our bodies. One of the biggest mistakes that I see clinicians make when they're teaching this is allowing too much space between the body and whatever object they're carrying. Being in the geriatric space, we're not always going to be in this gym type of setting or have dumbbells that are heavy enough or barbells in our clinic, but we can use almost any tool from a barbell, kettlebell, dumbbell, laundry basket with a bunch of weights in it, sack of potatoes, the list goes on and on. But what you want to do is you want to keep the bar or whatever instrument you are using nice and close to your body. And then the biggest thing is that you're chopping your hips back. So it's kind of hard on black pants here. But if you see me at max, like kind of setting up at a max range of motion for the deadlift, my knee is actually not flexed that much. Maybe like a max of like 40 or 50. What a lot of people will do though is they will sit into their deadlift, almost like they're doing a clean if you guys follow the fitness athlete guys. So what you want to think is that you're chopping your hips back and most of the range of motion is coming at the hip, right? So knee range of motion is in a relatively neutral territory. So individuals who are experiencing symptomatic knee pain may not have any flare-up in symptoms with this movement. And so you're able to keep the bar nice and close, and you're able to start teaching a little bit more of that posterior chain strengthening. You're able to get them moving through that movement. The impact is low in regards to impact forces through the knee, and you can start getting individuals to feel like they can do a little bit of strengthening without instantly flaring up their knees. What can happen is sometimes when you have individuals with really severe arthritis, they have a lot of fear around exercise. And in that case, even if I'm having good mechanics from the floor, for somebody with knee OA, I may bring them up to a surface, get them confident in that movement, and then start bringing them down towards the floor. The biggest indication for me in regards to bringing up the surface is around their joint mechanics. We always talk about in MMOA optimal over perfect. We know that as we get older, we're more likely to experience some of these joint issues or stiffness in our joints, which can create, sometimes we'll have people who have increased mechanical kyphosis, some people who will be relatively stuck in a posterior pelvic tilt, who are going to have very little excursion or movement segmentally through their lumbar spine. All of these things are going to be happening, and what we want to do is try to make sure that there's no segmental movement as people stand up with the deadlift. So if I have somebody who has symptomatic knee OA, which is the primary complaint that they're seeing me for, but they're starting to have a lot of segmental movement as they get down, I'm trying to demo this. So as I'm coming down into the bottom of the deadlift, my back is starting to round because of things related to hamstring length or any sort of tightness in general. Then I may bring them up just so that their movement pattern is looking as clean as possible without any movement. That being said, if I have somebody who's stuck in a fairly posterior pelvic tilt, I don't know if you guys can see this on camera, and then they're maintaining that position the entire way up, I'm actually not that worried about being able to safely complete this movement because they are not going to have that change in segment position, that AP force going through the lumbar spine, and they're less likely to have any sort of flare-up. I always joke sometimes with my clients too that because our discs shrink and that we end up having less water in our discs, that we're less likely to have disc herniations or any sort of lumbar pain related to discogenic low back pain. And that's one of the perks of getting older. Depends on the client if that's actually funny for them, but things that I find funny. But so then for the knee OA, the main point here is that most of the times you can get people down towards the floor. If you're teaching this movement properly, most of the movement should be happening at the hip, and as long as they have good hip range of motion, they're going to be able to kind of usually tolerate the amount of knee range of motion that's going to be required to do a deadlift or any sort of picking up movement from the floor. What happens when we start seeing individuals with hip OA? We know that the flexion, adduction, internal rotation, that fader quadrant is likely to be extremely restricted in individuals with moderate to severe OA. And oftentimes, a soft tissue approximation or pain and swelling or stiffness is going to cause that max hip flexion to be painful for individuals with hip OA. So that is when we're going to start considering things around an elevated surface. Many people in the geriatric space are more likely to be using things like dumbbells and kettlebells than barbells. I'm spoiled in that Stave Off has all of the above in regards to their instruments. So I'm going to go over the next exercise with hip OA and how we're doing hip hinging with symptomatic hip pain using a kettlebell. So one of the biggest issues that I think I see a lot when I'm teaching these courses is that individuals oftentimes are going to elevate the surface, and what that's going to cause is a huge amount of distance between the instrument that a person is lifting and the person. So what we want to think is that I'm going to try and speak a little bit louder, is that the further away the bar or whatever, if the kettlebell dumbbell is from you, the more stress that you're going to place on your low back, where that lever is going to be coming from, the muscles that are going to be doing more of the work, it's going to come from the hip, it's going to segmentally move up, and they're going to feel stress and strain along the low back. We also see that a lot of people who have very restricted hip range of motion can also be experiencing back pain. Oftentimes they can come together when I'm seeing them in clinic. And so we want to make sure that we are reducing the amount of stress and strain, and we are making sure that the hip is the primary mover for the deadlift. The low back is a stabilizer only and is not something that is working as a primary mover. So what can happen though is that because you're using something that may have a hard surface on it, people can't necessarily get their toes underneath in order to keep the bar or the kettlebell or the dumbbell nice and close to their body. And so they end up doing this almost like a setup for a kettlebell because it's so far away, and people may get a little bit nervous about completing this exercise because they're afraid that they're going to hurt their low back. One of the things that you can do is if you have a bench, then you can get them to slide their feet underneath. My other type of MacGyver trick is to just come on a corner. So I have a plush box here, and so because of that, if I was coming straight on, the length of a person's foot is going to limit how close I'm going to be able to get the kettlebell to them. But if I'm able to get them on the corner, then I can get the kettlebell nice and close to my client's body, and then they can come in and have it stay nice and close to them. The target that we use often for the dumbbell or the kettlebell is the line of the medial malleoli if you're using an instrument that is going to be forcing you into more of a sumo deadlift variation rather than a conventional. So you can use this trick to try and get the instrument as close to your body as possible, and then you can kind of manipulate the height of the object that you're using in order to start optimizing range of motion as an individual gets stronger, more confident with these movements. The next thing that I'm going to talk about is that you want to try and think that if you're using a sumo position, that rotation is going to be limited for my clients. So we talk about Fader's position, but we have to remember that when we're doing a sumo deadlift, that external rotation may be limited as well. So some people talk about getting more of a wider stance in order to be using a sumo deadlift, but we want to make sure that we are able to get a good amount of external rotation in order for that client to keep good positions. That's also going to encourage them to get their hips a little bit lower, which is fine if that is something that you want to be using, but just know that in a sumo position, your hips are going to be slightly lower than in a conventional variation where your hips are going to be a little bit higher, and that's going to change your angles slightly. So I hope you guys found that helpful. All of these modifications can be used depending on the client's range of motion, the instruments that you have available. Know that whatever instrument you're using, you want to try and keep the loading as close to the body as you can. Again, try and MacGyver any way that you can. If you're in home health, try and MacGyver a step stool or take things on an angle, making sure that you are also thinking about that rotary force going through the hip if you have an individual with symptomatic hip OA. And then just trying to load them up early, because we know that we may not be able to reverse the arthritis, but we can definitely reduce the pain with a strong amount of stability around those lower extremity joints. And we have a lot of tools in our toolbox to be able to do that. All right, guys, I hope you found that helpful. If you would like, comment below. If you guys use any other tips and tricks, I would love to compile a list of things that you guys can use when you are in clinic or in a person's home or in an assisted living facility. And other than that, I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and we will see you soon.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the PT on Ice Daily Show. If you enjoyed this content, head on over to iTunes and leave us a review. And be sure to check us out on Facebook and Instagram at the Institute of Clinical Excellence. If you're interested in getting plugged into more ICE content on a weekly basis while earning CEUs from home, check out our virtual ICE online mentorship program at ptonice.com. While you're there, sign up for our Hump Day Hustling newsletter for a free email every Wednesday morning with our top 5 research articles and social media posts that we think are worth reading. Head over to ptonice.com and scroll to the bottom of the page to sign up.